Bonjour, c'est Clara French in the Midland. Here we go again. Here's your latest update as from January the 14th on whether you can travel to France or not and what you need. Now, before we go any further, I just want to remind you that you can claim your free ebook, The 12 Golden Rules of French, at the link in the description. It's a short ebook that's packed with tips and tricks on how to sound like a native French speaker. Let's see exactly what changed on the 14th of Jan. It's mostly good news for vaccinated travelers because they will no longer need a compelling reason to travel. They won't need to isolate. They won't need to register on the EOS COVID platform anymore, and they won't need the day 2 test. However, they could still be subject to random screenings and testing at the airport, so you've got to just be ready for that just in case. Unvaccinated travelers are unfortunately worse off because they will now have to quarantine for 10 days at the place of their choice, and that will be checked by the gendarme. Now, if you are fully vaccinated, you will need to show your certificate of vaccination as usual, a negative PCR or antigen test result taken less than 24 hours before your trip. You can use a self-administered test as long as it's one of those that's certified by a third-party lab. NHS tests are not valid. And you will need your sworn declaration. And again, the link is in the description. And that's it. Now, if you're traveling with minors, they will be subject to the same rules as you, as a vaccinated person, whether they're vaccinated or not themselves. And this is important. On the other hand, the under 12 are still exempt from all tests. Now, if you are not fully vaccinated, it's more difficult as usual. You will need to show your certificate of travel showing a compelling reason for entering France, and there's a link for that in the description. You will need a negative PCR or antigen test result taken less than 24 hours before your trip. And you will need your sworn declaration. Again, the link is in the description. You will also need to register on the EOS COVID digital platform before leaving the UK. And finally, what's really changed is that you'll need to quarantine for 10 days on arrival in France. And this will be checked by the gendarme, so be very careful. Whereas before it used to be a 7-day self-isolation, it's now a proper quarantine, and it doesn't matter if you take a test or not, you still have to isolate for 10 days. If you're traveling with minors, they will be subject to the same rules as unvaccinated adults, but the under 12 will be exempt from all tests. Now, just a quick note as to what France regards as fully vaccinated. You've got to have received your Janssen vaccine 28 days before with 1 booster jab after another 2 months after those 28 days, or 7 days after the second dose for other vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and 1 booster jab 7 months later. This is valid for everybody over 18, not just the over 65. And unless you comply with the above, you're considered as unvaccinated. You have to share all the documents relevant to that category when you travel, and you also won't be getting a pass sanitaire in France, and this is really important. If you're wondering where to book your tests, I have a few pointers for you. In the UK, you can get tested at all major airports and test centres throughout the country. Now, if you only need an antigen test, then you can self-test, for instance using a C19 kit, and I give you the link in the description. You usually receive the results within a couple of hours. The only reason I recommend C19 is because I've used them in the past and found them really straightforward. In France, you can make an appointment online at Doctolib with a lab near you, and again I give you a link in the description. Or you can just turn up and queue at your local pharmacy, but be aware that not all of them offer COVID tests, so Google it beforehand. And again, they will send you your results within a few hours, so it's very straightforward. Now, before we finish, I'd like to give you some advice about airlines or transport companies. They have been known to make up their own rules, which again are different from government guidance. For instance, only accepting PCR tests for travel when the government says you can have an antigen test. So check what their requirements are before you travel and before you buy any tests. This is really important. I know it's going to make your trip really complicated, but it's really worth doing. You don't want to be turned away at the border. And finally, beware that the test results are only usually accepted in French, English or Spanish. And that's it for now. Thank you for watching. And if you have any questions, leave a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. À bientôt.